She's like a sickness in my brain, a vision standing by the window pane. She ripples through the blinds and leaves me in a daze. It's in the way her body moves me, the way she grabs me and intoxicates, until the signals in my mind forget to operate. She'll put the pressure in your fragile skull. I take my pleasure from my alcohol. She'll never give you any time at all. She just comes and goes, you know, and she's got me living in a chemical love, and I try to find the strength to know she comes back to me again.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another coffee and crime time. It's Christmas season officially. I'm recording this like midway through the month, so I'm feeling finally like I can start getting into the Christmas spirit, but I've only gotten like half of my presents wrapped, so I really like to do that early on, and it just hasn't really been working out this month. In fact, because I recently, moved into this new house over the summer, I kind of lost track of all my hiding spots because I still have young children, so I hide things, and I haven't really tracked down everything yet. Let me know if you're in the same boat. Not a really great boat to be in because I don't feel like going on a scavenger hunt this week, which is what I'm going to have to do. But today we're talking about a little bit more good news, I guess, if you can look at true crime and think that anything's good news. Today we're talking about two cold cases that happened in November of 1999. And they have both recently been given new life due to DNA technology that was not available in 1999. So I guess when it comes to true crime and cases like this, that's the best news possible that you can get, to hopefully, no matter how long it takes, find some kind of closure and I guess solve the crime so that the family members can have some justice and closure. That's the best you can hope for. 30-year-old young Kavilla, who was killed in her Chicago apartment, and 23-year-old Jennifer Watkins, who was killed at her place of employment, Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs. Before we dive in, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, and today's video is sponsored by Native. Native makes all-natural, vegan, and cruelty-free deodorant with clean ingredients that you can understand, such as coconut oil, baking soda, probiotics, and shea butter. It is December, like we just talked about, so I know that a lot of us are busy focusing on others because that's what the holiday season is about, making sure we've picked out the perfect gift for our loved ones that shows them that we care. But how do you show yourself that you care? Well, we can easily show that we care about ourselves by choosing to put products in our body that are healthy and clean. Native's deodorant is made without aluminum, parabens, or sulfates, using only safe and clean ingredients that are also effective. The formula is non-sticky and it dries quickly, so you don't have to worry about white streaks on your clothing or like lumpy, chalky substances left in your armpit. And Native's deodorants last all day long after exercise, running after the kids, marathon gift wrapping sessions, searching for gifts around your house, and filming in front of these hot lights 4 hours a day. Best of all, in my opinion, they smell great. They smell amazing. My favorite scent is definitely eucalyptus and mint, but I love their limited edition scents as well, which change based on the season. For fall, it was apple and honeysuckle. I wish I'd bought like 12 of them because I love them so much. It smells so good. And now I'm obsessed with candy cane. I do want to mention as well that Native body washes are my absolute favorite body washes of all time. They smell amazing. There's different scents than I've ever seen in any other body wash, just different combinations, things you wouldn't expect to work together, but they do. They lather beautifully, which sometimes means they're going to dry your skin out, but they do not leave your skin feeling dry. They're so moisturizing. I absolutely love them. The scent I tried that I at first didn't think I would end up liking, but ended up being my favorite, was rosemary and lemon zest. I love it so much, and so does everyone else in my house apparently, because they all ended up using it, and I wasn't happy, and now I have to get more. They also have a candy cane body wash that matches your deodorant, so you can really be ready for the holiday season, just smelling like a straight-up candy cane, because it really does smell like a candy cane. Native has recently also released a plastic-free version of their deodorant made with paperboard that Native is committed to sourcing from responsibly managed forests, and Native is a proud partner of 1% for the Planet, committing 1% of plastic-free deodorant sales to environmental nonprofits, which is really good. 1% doesn't sound like a lot right off the bat, but when you consider like on a larger scale, it's good. 3 plastic-free deodorants are normally $39, but if you use my link in the description box and enter code StephanieH6, you'll get them for $29. That's 25% off. They also offer free shipping to the United States. So all you have to do is click on the link in the description box, use code StephanieH6, and get 3 plastic-free deodorants for just $29. Thank you to Native for sponsoring this video, and let's dive in. Let's start with young Kavila. She was originally from Korea, and it seems she lived in Vancouver, Washington for a time before moving to a small first-floor apartment in the Chicago, Illinois area, not far from the city's airport, O'Hare. But she moved there just 6 weeks before her death, so she hadn't been in Chicago long. She'd been working as a United Airlines flight attendant, and it seemed like her circle was really small. So her current boyfriend was also a flight attendant with United, as was her roommate who lived with her in the apartment, and her ex-husband, who's referred to as her estranged husband in news articles and things. He also was a flight attendant, but for a different airline company. And I think this is pretty standard when that's your career, because you're just not really in one place for very long, right? You're traveling all over the place, so you just end up gravitating towards people who are also in the same line of work. On the evening of November 30th, 1999, Young had just returned to the city after a flight, and sometime between 8 p.m. and 10:10 p.m., she returned home, not knowing someone was lying in wait for her in the dark depths of her apartment. Her roommate, who'd also been out of town for work for several days, returned that evening at around 10:20 p.m. to find Young dead on the floor of their kitchen, wearing only a bra. Police arrived and began questioning people that Young knew. They questioned residents of the apartment complex where Young and her roommate lived, which was the Colonial Park Apartments near Elmhurst and Algonquin Roads. They also conducted interviews at the apartments that were adjacent to Colonial Park, which were the Clayton Court Apartments. They had her picture. They were showing it around at the 2 apartment complexes. They were going to nearby convenience stores and things like that, just asking anybody, like, did you know this girl? Was anybody following her? Did you notice anything strange about her behavior? Typical early investigation kind of stuff. No one had really seen or heard anything besides one tenant who lived directly next door to young Kavila and her roommate. This woman was named Penny Durling, and she'd never really officially met either of the young women who lived next door. She said they were quiet and they weren't often home. But on the evening of November 30th, 1999, Penny heard a loud thump at about 9:45 p.m. An autopsy showed several slash marks to Young's neck and defensive wounds to her hands, which showed that she had put up a fight. One large gash, bigger and deeper than the rest of them, that was found on her neck ended up being her cause of death. And the murder weapon had been a boot knife, which I guess is just a regular knife that you can fit in your boot, or it's small enough to fit in your boot. For some reason, when I heard boot knife, I got this vision of a boot with a knife in the toe of it, and then you kind of kick something and the knife comes out. I don't know why. I don't know what kind of movies I'm watching where that's the thing I saw in my head when I heard boot knife, but essentially a boot knife is just something that's small enough, I guess, that you can slip it into your boot and conceal it. And although initially police said that there was no sign of sexual assault, that would prove not to be true. And I think we could all gather that from the fact that she was found wearing only her bra, and I don't anticipate that she did that to herself or of her own free will. There had been DNA found at the scene, however. Blood stains found on young Kavila's shoe, as well as on her bedding, and a fingerprint found on the doorknob. No one in the system matched to the fingerprint, and at this time, DNA technology was not advanced enough to, search through databases. There weren't DNA databases that were just available. So they weren't able to really do much with the sample recovered besides put it in evidence, store it, and keep it. For a while, the case went cold, and there were no leads. In the spring and summer of the following year, there was a string of strange events that police thought for a time might be linked to Young's murder. There were a bunch of home invasions and attempted home invasions that were happening on Chicago's north side where Young lived. I can't figure out if it was more than one man or if it was multiple men from the articles that I searched through, because I had to go in the archives and I had to look at old newspaper articles. There wasn't much on like Google and Yahoo and things. From the articles, I get the impression that it was just actually one single man. But it seemed like this man was going to like doors of women's houses or apartments and posing as a public official, phone company worker, police officer, Census Bureau worker, etc. In 5 of the attacks, the women were of Asian descent, which led some to question if Young had been the unfortunate victim of this man who seemed to move really quickly throughout the Chicago suburbs. He'd be reported at the door of one apartment building, and then a few hours later, he'd be, across town at the door of another apartment building. So he didn't seem to let up. If he didn't get invited in or allowed into one apartment or one house, he would just move on. He wasn't deterred. But soon, word spread, as it does, and people in the area became a lot more suspicious and wary of strangers knocking on their doors, and nobody was letting him in. Now, in 2007, authorities received a tip about a man who had lived in Young Kavila's apartment building the year she'd been killed. His name was Luis Rodriguez Mena, and apparently, the day after the murder, he and his pregnant girlfriend, who he also lived with in the apartment building, they left Chicago and they went to Mexico, and he never came back after this. He never returned to the States, at least not that we know of. At this point, when he's in Mexico, Luis began bragging to family members about how he had committed the crime, the murder of Young Kavila, and he'd gotten away with it, but he told them if they ever spoke about it or told authorities or told anyone that they would be next. So he basically threatened their lives. Like, I'm going to brag about this murder to you, but you can't tell anyone. I just want to tell someone about it and, brag about how I got away with it, which doesn't make any sense. But apparently that's what happened. And apparently someone in his family, who I believe was his girlfriend, who he lived with at the time of the murder, but it hasn't really been verified. There were some kind of indications that it was her, but none of the articles I read ever came right out and said it was her. But someone ended up calling police and telling them that he was confessing to this. So Luis had been a suspect in Young's murder since 2007, but he was in Mexico, and not only that, he was moving around Mexico a lot to evade officials from both Mexico and the U.S. But then, in 2008, investigators got a tip that Luis's girlfriend had moved back to Illinois, and she'd brought with her the son that she shared with Luis, the one she was pregnant with when Young Kavila died. And once she was tracked down, she agreed to allow police to take a DNA sample from her son to test against the DNA found at the scene of Young Kavila's murder. The DNA was a 99.98% match, and due to some legal trouble that Luis had gotten himself into Mexico, officials were also able to match the fingerprint found on the door of Kavila's apartment to him as well. He was arrested this past June in Mexico, and over the past several months, there's been all this, red tape and paperwork that has to, be gone through in order to extradite someone from Mexico to the United States. But this month, December 2020, he was finally extradited to the States, where he's been charged with first-degree murder and ordered held without bail. Editing Stephanie here. So after I recorded this video and before I finished editing it, another article came out about Young Kavila in the Chicago Tribune. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from that article to clarify some things and add a little bit more information. So it says, whoever killed flight attendant Young Kavila, deeply gashing her neck, left plenty of evidence behind at her apartment in Des Plaines. The killer had wiped his hand on her bed covers and had briefly dropped a bloody knife there. He also left clear finger and palm prints on the kitchen counter and a doorknob, It also says that Kavila was killed after getting off a flight that was coming into Chicago. She stopped to buy groceries and takeout food on her way home around 10 p.m. But Luis Rodriguez Mena had allegedly gotten to her apartment and was waiting for her. Now, it also says that Kavila fought back as he tried to sexually assault her in the kitchen. She used a small personal grooming razor to slash her attacker, but police say Rodriguez Mena had a boot knife and cut her throat, and then he left. So it appears that he attempted to sexually assault her, but he didn't get the chance to because she fought back. Good for her. Now, when Kavila's roommate found her just minutes later, she was lying face up in the kitchen, and a diamond ring, necklaces, and her wallet were missing. So he came in, hid in her apartment, waited for her, tried to sexually assault her. She fought back. He realized, I guess, that it wasn't going to work, so he killed her, and then he stole from her. It was also in October 2007 when a family of immigrants told detectives about a relative in Mexico who bragged of the homicide and threatened to kill any relative who gave him up. The relatives said they fled to Mexico after Rodriguez Mena threatened one of them with a screwdriver and also threatened to kill a second relative and her family. This article in the Chicago Tribune also says that Luis Rodriguez Mena had been living openly at his parents' house in Mexico at least until July of 2007, and at that point he secured a driver's license in his own name, which government records in central Mexico show, and after that, his family kept moving him around Mexico to evade authorities. Police Chief William Kushner said, quote, "They were aware of this right from the beginning when he fled to Mexico. In 1999, he admitted to his family members that he had killed a flight attendant in Des Plaines, which is in Chicago. They hid it from everyone. They kept hiding him and kept moving him around." So pretty much what we had already discussed, but there were some things that were incorrect in articles I had read, or this article cleared up for us from the articles I had read because they were very vague. So I just wanted to pop in here with new information so we're as up to date as possible, and we'll return to the video now.
In 2007, a family member came forward with information implicating Luis Rodriguez Mena, who had been living in the area with his girlfriend at the time of the murder, as the offender in this murder. The family member further stated that Mena, who had significant wounds to his upper torso, had fled to the area of Cuernavaca, Mexico, with his pregnant girlfriend. While in Cuernavaca, Mena admitted to family members he had committed this murder and that his wounds had been inflicted by the victim. Mena's family hid this from his girlfriend. The girlfriend subsequently returned to the United States, the Chicago area, and gave birth to a son. In 2008, Mena's girlfriend was located and gave detectives consent to obtain her son's DNA from a buccal swab of his cheek. This DNA profile was compared through the Illinois State Police Forensics Laboratory to blood evidence recovered at the scene and came up as a 99.98% match. In February of 2008, a no bail arrest warrant was issued in Cook County Circuit Court for Luis Rodriguez Mena for first-degree murder. February 20th of 2008, a federal provisional arrest warrant was issued in the U.S. District Court, Northern Illinois. In May of 2008, the latent fingerprint recovered at the scene was compared with a print taken from Mena during a 2006 arrest in Mexico. Examiners from the Illinois State Police Forensics Laboratory determined that the prints were a match. In June of 2020, working closely with our federal and international partners from Mexico and Interpol, Mena was taken into custody in Mexico. Extradition was granted. Mena was returned to the United States via O'Hare Airport and turned over to Des Plaines police. He was charged last night with 3 counts of first-degree murder and is appearing in Skokie Bond Court as we speak. This case is a tremendous example of tireless determination on the part of our detectives, as well as the outstanding cooperative efforts between our department and the FBI, Homeland Security, Illinois State Police, Interpol, and the Mexican authorities.
It does feel good when you see the bad guy get caught, even if we had to wait so many years. Luis is 46 years old now, but he clearly was incapable of keeping out of trouble. He was incapable of keeping his mouth shut, and that's annoying because he was so messy about it, and it took so long for him to finally be, taken into custody. He's been able to live his life for 21 years. And who knows who else he's hurt or who else he's done this to. For someone to just go into somebody else's apartment, kill them, sexually abuse them, and then just, leave and then start talking about it, clearly this is not a person who has a moral compass or a conscience or feels any guilt or regrets. So I can't imagine how many other people he did this to. But the saddest part for me is I couldn't find out much about Young, who she was, what her life was like, etc. The reports I could find showed that her parents, who still lived in Korea, flew to Chicago after her death, as did her estranged husband, who was also a flight attendant, like I said, but there's really nothing else. And that makes me feel bad. Although her death has now been solved, there's no way to really tell what she was like in life or, what her hopes and dreams were. Like, what did she want to do? Did she want kids? What was her favorite ice cream? What did she like to do when she wasn't traveling around? What kind of places had she been to? I'm sure she had a very colorful and interesting life. And I hate making videos where the sole thing that defines a person, a victim, is their murder and how they died. I looked for a full day, like 6 hours straight. I even pulled up old newspaper articles and I just found nothing. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with the fact that her parents were never interviewed due to the language barrier. But I have to imagine that her roommate would have had something to say about her. I mean, they lived together, even if it was for just a short time. Her ex-husband, who was married to her, who knows how long they were married, there's nothing that says how long they were married or why they got divorced, why they were estranged. But I'm sure he has something to say about her. Her new boyfriend, I don't know, once again, how long they were dating, how they met, etc. But someone must have known her well enough to give us a little peek into her life. They just never did, or they were never asked, and I suspect that it's the latter. I think that especially in the past years, there just wasn't much of a concentration on the victim. Like today, when you see an article written about somebody who's lost their lives, there is that stuff, and that's the stuff that I really like to see. I want to get to know the person first before I find out how their life ended, because how their life ended is such a small little piece of what they were, who they were. It's definitely not the most important piece. So I really like to know who they are before getting to that. And I don't think there was so much of a push in like 1999 for that. It was more about the murder, the murderer, the sensationalized aspect of it all. And that's clearly seen in how these stories are reported then as opposed to now. Next, we are going to Colorado Springs to talk about 23-year-old Jennifer Lee Skinner. Now, according to this article from Westward, Jennifer was the second of 4 children, and she was the closest to her younger brother, Joseph. She attended Hanover High School. She liked playing volleyball. She liked animals. She also played the clarinet in the school band. After high school, she attended Barnes Business School in Denver, Colorado, and at this time, she started seriously dating a man she'd known since grade school, and his name was Michael Watkins. And she would eventually go on to marry Michael and have 2 children with him. But according to her parents, this was when things in her life took a little bit of a downturn because Michael struggled with substance abuse, and he would often physically abuse Jennifer, sending her to the emergency room on more than one occasion. Jennifer, who had always loved helping both people and animals, had wanted to become a nurse, and after they were married for about 3 years, Michael got a job at Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs, and soon after, Jennifer followed, also getting a job at Memorial Hospital and working as a food service aide. Now, on November 6th, 1999, Jennifer had been working her shift during the day, and she was supposed to pick her 2 children up from her mother's house after work and then go home. Her 2 children were 3-year-old Michael Jr. and 11-month-old Mariah, so they were very young, obviously. Very sad that her children probably don't even remember her because she died when they were so young. But Jennifer didn't pick the kids up from her mother's house, nor did she go home where her husband was waiting and noticed that Jennifer didn't come home. So the police were called both by Michael and Jennifer's mother, and a missing persons report was filed. It wasn't until 2 days later, when elevator service employees were working in an area of the hospital that was under construction and I assume closed off to the public. Once again, this is never specifically said, but it's an area of the hospital that's under construction. So typically when that's the case, it is closed off to the public so that people don't get hurt and sue the hospital. So these employees were working in this area and they found a body under a stairwell wrapped in a construction sheet and plastic and bound with duct tape. It was Jennifer. She'd been sexually assaulted and she'd been killed due to blunt force trauma to her head. Now, obviously, Jennifer's husband, Michael, would be the main suspect early on. Not only was there a history of domestic violence in their marriage, but he worked at the hospital, so he would have been familiar with her comings and goings, maybe the way that she would take to leave the hospital. He'd be familiar with the landscape, etc. However, police discovered a lot of DNA evidence at the scene, including a yellowish stain on the sheet that she was wrapped in, which was later discovered to be semen. And this was a pretty big stain. This wasn't just like a little bit that escaped. Clearly, this person who did this was either not knowledgeable about DNA, or maybe he was very knowledgeable about DNA and he knew that his DNA couldn't tie him to this crime at that time. I'm not sure. There was also human hairs as well as fibers found on Jennifer's body, and all of this forensic evidence was sent to the CBI, which is the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, for further analysis. But once again, this is 1999, so the DNA could be used to clear suspects like her husband, but there was no databases with tons of DNA that were donated by willing participants ready to be compared against. So the case went cold. Even though Michael Watkins, Jennifer's husband, was technically cleared as a suspect because it wasn't his DNA that was found at the scene, he was followed by suspicion for many years after. A lot of people in that area believed he still had something to do with what happened to his wife, and the case wasn't solved at that time, so there was really nothing to quell these rumors. So I feel really bad in situations like this for the children. They lose their mother or they lose their father, and then the other parent is kind of suspected of being responsible and they have to live under that shadow. I don't think we consider that enough. It reminds me a lot of the case that we just covered on our podcast, Crime Weekly. Jennifer Dulos and Fotis Dulos, like, to think about those 5 kids, Jennifer and Fotis's children, who not only lost their mother, but had to live under the shadow of this investigation into their father for so long, and then, eventually did lose their father as well when he took his own life. It's so sad that the children have to go through this and deal with this and live under scrutiny and live and grow up hearing these rumors. Well, even if it wasn't Michael Watkins, it was somebody, right? So who did it end up being? Enter Parabon Labs, a biotechnology company in Weston, Virginia. Parabon says they are engineering DNA for next-generation therapeutics and forensics. So they do all sorts of things there, including the development of new pharmaceuticals. It's kind of really interesting, actually, if you don't mind a little detour. They have something called Assemblex with an E, not an A, like Assemblex. And the tagline of Assemblex is designing drugs one molecule at a time. And they go on to say that by fully leveraging the power of DNA, they are developing a new class of nanopharmaceuticals that provide individualized treatments for some of the most challenging diseases. It also says that they're actively using Assemblex to develop a vaccine formulation for HIV. And interestingly enough, they're also working with the U.S. Department of Defense to develop new drug nanocarriers and investigate new methods of biopathogen detection and decontamination. Now, these are all big words, but essentially from what I get from it, reading it and not being an expert in nanotechnology, it's like almost specialized technology where if you have this rare genetic disease, you don't always get to have a medicine for that. I remember watching I forget what it was called. I'm going to have to find it and put it in the description box. I promise if I find it, I will. But it was so interesting. And it was this documentary, multi-parts, about genetics and DNA and stuff like that, and genetic diseases, which often don't have therapeutics because of the fact that they're very rare. So if only the small amount of the population has this genetic disease or genetic issue, there's really not a lot of R&D, which is research and development, for these kind of genetic issues because only a small percentage of the population has it. So there's not a lot of money, and that's the bottom line, right? There's not a lot of money for pharmaceutical companies to spend all this time and effort and money developing a drug or a cure for something that not a lot of people have, because then there's not going to be a lot of people who want it, supply and demand kind of thing. So it really looks like this nanotechnology might actually help with people who have these kinds of rare genetic diseases, because the cure or the treatment can be kind of tailored to their specific body chemistry, DNA, genetics, like stuff like that. It's very, very cool. So this says how Assemblix works. Key to the approach is the use of synthetic DNA as a programmable molecular substrate. Although DNA is best known as a carrier of genetic information, strands of synthetic DNA can be constructed to have any sequence of bases. Because complementary sequences of DNA are mutually attractive, synthetic strands can be programmed with sequences that cause them to swim to the right spot with respect to one another and then bind to form nanostructures of virtually any shape. Before self-assembly is induced, DNA strands can be attached to other types of molecular subcomponents so that they are pulled into designated locations by the DNA strands during self-assembly. That is so cool. And listen, like, if you watched this documentary that I'm talking about, this would be more interesting to you, because I remember one of the first stories was this little girl, and she has this rare genetic disease, and she's so sick, and she's dying. And if they don't find a cure or they don't find a treatment, she's going to die. And she's just this innocent little girl whose parents love her so much and have devoted so much time and effort and so much of their hearts to trying to save her. And I just can't imagine being in that situation, because, yeah, my kids drive me crazy. They tire me out, but I'm so blessed that they're healthy. They're healthy. They don't have to go through this. We don't have to go through this. And I feel so sad for people who do, because there's just not the support out there. Let me look up and see if I can find this documentary. So it's a PBS documentary called The Gene. It's so good. I actually started watching it with my 9-year-old, who was 8 at the time when we were watching it, and he cried. He was so sad for this little girl whose name is Susanna. Oh my goodness, it's so sad. And if you do watch it, the narrator has a very pronounced voice, like a very recognizable voice, but it will take you a minute to figure out who it is. But once you hear it, you'll be like, I've heard this voice somewhere, and you'll have to look it up. So let me know if you do. Okay, anyways, moving on, right? Parabon also does DNA analytics, genealogy, and DNA forensics, which is what we're supposed to be talking about before I got off track. Specifically, what we're talking about is a program called Snapshot, which uses DNA phenotyping to predict the physical appearance and ancestry of a person just by looking at their DNA. It's crazy. And I know that a lot of 23andMe and genealogy things, they will actually do this. I've seen them. My friend did one of these. I think it was 23andMe, and it was crazy because it predicted what color her eyes were, what color her hair was, if she was fair skinned or darker skinned, how much she weighed, how tall she was, things like that. Crazy, without ever seeing her. And this is what they did in Jennifer Watkins' case with the DNA found at the scene. In 2017, Colorado detectives worked with Parabon to create a composite sketch based on the DNA profile that was found on Jennifer's body. And in June of 2018, that composite sketch was released to the public. Because of the work of Parabon, a suspect was identified, a man named Ricky Servert, who was 29 years old at the time of Jennifer's murder, and who also worked at the hospital as a maintenance worker. Now, it appears that Ricky was questioned in the aftermath of Jennifer's murder, since he'd been at the hospital that day working a shift, but he denied ever having seen Jennifer or even knowing her. So when he was identified as a suspect, authorities were unable to take Ricky into custody and question him further, because 2 years after he raped and murdered Jennifer Watkins, Ricky had been killed in a car accident north of Colorado Springs. He died 3 days before the 2-year anniversary of her murder, which is poetic justice in a way because, although we don't get to see him in handcuffs now, 21 years later, we can at least rest easy knowing that he hasn't been on the loose all this time, like Luis from the first case we talked about, hunting more women, hurting more women. But it's crazy because look at the composite sketch done by Parabon Labs and look at Ricky's driver's license picture. I believe this was taken in the year 2000. It is really similar. It's very similar, and it blows my mind that just your DNA can predict this accurately, like your physical appearance. And speaking of physical appearances, this is Cece Moore, who's 51 years old, but she must have access to the fountain of youth because she looks amazing. And on top of being beautiful, she's also hella smart. Cece is the star of ABC's The Genetic Detective, where she uses her skills and knowledge of genealogy and teamed up with the folks at Parabon to solve cold cases using DNA. And get this, I'm so impressed. As of mid-May, they have solved 109 cold cases. That's insane. And it looks like the CBI has been teaming up with Parabon quite a bit to go through these cold cases and clear them up and sort of just get them solved. I wish that they could use this to actually put people like Letitia Stout in prison for good and not even allow her to write letters to judges and try to get out and kind of just throw her in jail and throw away the key kind of thing. But, she needs to have a trial. But I'm so pleased to see DNA coming to the forefront. I'm really interested to learn more about it because I truly believe that DNA forensics is going to be the new standard for police work, in my opinion. It takes away a lot of the personal biases. It takes away, interpretation of the evidence. It takes away human error. The DNA is either a match or it's not. And I think that we are hopefully going to see crime rates decrease as criminals realize that it's very difficult to commit a crime, especially a crime like the ones that we've talked about in these 2 cases. It's very difficult to commit these kinds of crimes without leaving a little piece of yourself behind. That's the hope, at least. Or, they'll just get better at covering their tracks. Either way, we can only hope to kind of evolve scientifically and hopefully evolve faster than the criminal mind. And the more I read about Cece Moore, the more I want to meet her because this is a woman I could really be friends with. She's very victim focused. She's very interested in going through talking to victims of sex crimes especially and helping them find closure and see their attacker either be identified or be brought to justice. So I really hope that one day I get to meet Cece Moore, and I'm really interested in looking more into her and kind of finding out more about what she does. If you want a video about what she does or genetics and DNA and fighting crimes and things like that, because I know I kind of did go off on a tangent in this video, but if you want a video about that, let me know. But as of now, I leave it off to you. What do you guys think? Do you also think that DNA is going to be more important in not only solving crimes, but fighting crimes, maybe deterring criminal activity? Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you've seen that documentary, The Gene, on PBS. And also let me know if you've found all the hiding spots that you've put your presents in your house, because maybe it'll give me an idea of where I might have stored mine. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I'll definitely talk to you again before Christmas. But if I put out a video and you don't watch it, happy holidays. I love you guys so much. Stay kind, stay beautiful. Bye.
Would a levee don't break now, and the bottle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood on the strings.